the industry for since 1982, so that's a long time. That is a very long time. And I've worked in all facets of the industry. So I've worked with passenger train operations, freight train operations, construction in the industry, signalling, the whole lot. So I've sort of been across the whole gamut, I guess. I'm currently working for Alstom Transportation now. I've got a national role. So my role is the EHS and Rail Safety Manager for their services business. So I've been there for about 3 months. So prior to that, I was a Senior Rail Safety Officer with the Office of the National Rail Safety Regulator, which is ONSA. I was there for 7 years. So in this role, I was responsible for managing the regulatory requirements of 12 Tier 1 rail operators. So they were sort of civil or rolling stock manufacturers. And they included John Holland, CPB contractors, down at EDI, Alstom and others. So I've been around, and certainly I think one of the good segues to get into Alstom was that I did manage all the regulatory ONSA affairs around ONSA, and also managed the merger between Bombardier Transportation into the Alstom business as well from a rail safety point of view on behalf of ONSA. So I've got expert knowledge in this area here of rail safety accreditation. Over the years, I guess I've probably assessed over 100 applications. So I certainly know fairly back to front. And I'm really very happy to share this information with you guys. Rail safety accreditation is not easy to understand. It can be quite complex at times. But what I've done in this presentation, I've sort of broken it down into, I guess, layman terms, so that each and every one of you can try to get a good understanding of what it really means without going too technical, I guess, into the subject. So what I'm going to talk about today is how the accreditation process works with ONSA. I'll provide an overview of the types of accreditation there is with under the Rail Safety National Law, which I'll call the RSNL for this presentation. The permissions around the types of accreditation that can be applied for from operators. The the compliance requirements under ONSA's accreditation scheme, and the ONSA accreditation assessment process, which is very important, and how to manage variations to accreditation. So once you get an accreditation and you need to expand on that or take some of the, I guess, accredited activities out the way, there's a formal process with ONSA where you must submit a variation to the actual accreditation. Okay. So a bit about ONSA. So as I said, the Office of the National Rail Safety Regulator, ONSA, they administer the Rail Safety National Law, or the RSNL. And also as part of that process, they also administer a National Rail Safety Accreditation Scheme. Okay. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So in terms of ONSA, they adopt a co-regulatory approach with the accredited rail transport operators. So the acronym for rail transport operators is RTOs, and I'll use that term from now on in this presentation. So the approach is really, it's not so much about cooperation between ONSA and the operator. It's more about a system based on trust and ongoing trust that an accredited operator, once they get their accreditation, will be scrutinised by ONSA in an ongoing manner through audits and things like that. So basically, once you get your accreditation, you're right to go because you've demonstrated that you've got the competence and capacity to be able to operate a railway. And then after that, they leave you to your own devices, and they may come out every now and again, once or twice a year, and do audits or inspections to make sure that the operations are running in accordance with your own safety management system and the Rail Safety National Law. Okay, so the other thing about ONSA too is that ONSA don't directly prescribe the standards and rules for operators, okay? What they do, they actually set performance standards and expectations with the operators. So in the Rail Safety National Law, it's all about performance standards and expectations that operators will operate safely in the rail environment. So when I say they don't prescribe standards and rules, some of the regulators dictate code, standards and rules, which you must have in your safety management system. But ONSA doesn't actually go down that path. What they do is that they say, if you're going to put a standard or a code or a rule into your safety management system and say this is what you're going to comply with, then that's what they hold you to when they come out and do their audits on you. All right. So the Rail Safety National Law, it's a duty-based safety management regime, and as such, ONS is not a technical regulator. Okay, so RTOs nominate the standards to which they've got to comply with, and basically they have to put them in their safety management system, and that's it. ONSA holds them to in terms of compliance. So when I say they're not a technical-based regulator, some of the regulators like CASA for the airline industry, or some of the mining regulators dictate that there's certain standards and codes you absolutely have to comply with, but ONSA doesn't say that. They say you choose your own and put them in your system, and then we'll come out and we'll audit to make sure you're complying with them. Okay. All right. So about the scheme. So ONSA's accreditation scheme. So ONSA's rail safety accreditation schemes legislated in the Rail Safety National Law, Section 65. So RTOs, or rail transport operators, have legal requirements to be accredited prior to conducting railway operations. So if you're not accredited, you're pretty much, well, you can't, operate a railway. But there are a few exceptions. I'll talk about that in a minute. The accreditation scheme is aimed at ensuring that ONSA has oversight of any rail transport operators that operate a railway in Australia. And, of course, significant fines apply for people that are conducting railway operations that don't have rail safety accreditation. So the exceptions are that under some circumstances, if a rail contractor needs to do certain pieces of work in, say, the rail corridor or build rail infrastructure, there are times where they can actually work under an accredited rail transport operator's rail safety accreditation. But to go down that path, there's got to be a lot of checks and balances put in place. Okay. All right, so the types of accreditation at ONSA, now this is where it gets a little bit tricky here. So there's basically, hang on, I'll go back on. Here we go, wrong stuff already. Yeah. So there's 4 types of accreditation here. The first 2 you see there is rolling stock and rail infrastructure manager. So they come under the banner of formal accreditation under the ONSA accreditation regime. So a rolling stock operator, this can apply to, rail transport operators that conduct rolling stock operations, such as the operation of passenger trains, the operation of freight trains, or the operation of construction-related vehicles, such as track machines, ballast regulators, etc. The other type of accreditation, formal accreditation, applies to rail transport operators that conduct rail infrastructure operations, and these are activities such as track and infrastructure works, installation of signalling systems, or the construction of railway stations or implementation of train control systems. Okay. Now, under the formal accreditation, if you get accredited for either one of them or both, it'll sit on what's called a notice of accreditation, and that's the accredited activities. Now, there's another type of accreditation which is called a registration. Okay, so a registration basically applies to RTOs that perform railway activities within what we call a private siding. So what that is a railway siding that's shut off from the main line, and they're basically in a a sort of locked-in area. So they can't operate in the main line, but they can operate in a siding, a railway siding. And the activities under a registration generally include the loading, storage, and or repair of rolling stock within a confined track area. Okay, so some examples of private siding registration would be, operators that want to load infrastructure trains in sidings and get a mainline operator to take them out. So they'll be doing the loading, etc., inside the siding, but they won't operate the train on the main line. Another good example would be if an operator wants to load, grains, for instance, at a grain silo in the country area. There'll be a private siding for the confined track area. They'll be able to load the train up with wheat or barley or whatever it is. But once they've done their job, they hand it over to an accredited operator that takes the trains onto the main line. So registered siding, for that process, you need to go through an accredited or accreditation assessment, but it's far lesser than the requirements of a formal registration, if that makes sense. So in the case of a full-blown accredited operator, they've got to comply with pretty much most of the Rail Safety National Law, whereas a private siding or registration, there's only 4 key areas that they need to comply with, and that is to manage the risk to safety with the site risk register, ensure compliance with their safety duty obligations, enter into a safety interface agreement with other parties that they might interface with, and implement a scheme to inspect and maintain the track infrastructure that they work on. And the last one there is exemption. Now, this is an interesting one. So an exemption may be issued to a person that requires an exemption from formal rail safety accreditation so that they can lawfully, under the rail safety national law, carry out a railway operation. So this might include any unaccredited contractors that need to conduct railway operations as prescribed under the rail safety national law, but they will only do it for a short period of time or a one-off type of scenario. So examples of this might be the one-off movement of rolling stock, or maybe installation of rail infrastructure on the network, or just access to a rail corridor on a temporary basis. So with an exemption, it's a person that's not accredited but wants to get an exemption to operate for a short period of time, perhaps on a one-off occasion on the rail network. So they're the top of accreditations. Okay, so I'll go to the next slide here. So what must be demonstrated when seeking accreditation? All right, so there's 2 main factors here. When an accreditation application assessment is received, ONSA want to know that the competency and capacity, that the operator has a competency and capacity to manage the risk to safety within the railway operations for which they're going to apply for or carry out. So in terms of competency, the RTOs must have the ability to develop, implement and maintain a safety management system in compliance with the rail safety national law. RTOs must also demonstrate they have the resources to manage the operations such as people, plant and equipment. So during the assessment phase, that's what ONSA looks at. In terms of capacity, RTOs must demonstrate that they have the necessary assets, infrastructure, systems in place to safely manage the railway operations, but also under the capacity banner, the RTOs must also have the financial capacity to support the railway, such as insurances, and maintain operational budgets to pay access fees and all sorts of things, and onto fees. Okay. So once they can demonstrate competency and capacity, the assessment will happen. Now, in terms of the types of railway operations, there's basically, as I sort of alluded to before, under rolling stock operator rail infrastructure, there's 2 main areas that ONSA look at or accredit people for. So with rolling stock operator, an operator can actually apply to be a rolling stock operator, or they can apply to be a rail infrastructure manager, or alternatively, they can apply to do both. So there are operators out there that might just be a rail infrastructure manager, and they'll basically install signalling systems or build track, construct track, etc. And that's all they do. They don't operate trains. Or some operators out there could be a rolling stock operator, where they purely operate freight trains, passenger trains, but they don't maintain rail infrastructure as such. Okay, sorry, I'll go back here. So with a rolling stock operator, I guess the permissions that they can have under the rail safety national law are to not just operate trains, all right, but they can design rolling stock, they can construct rolling stock, they can commission, maintain and modify rolling stock as well. And they can also decommission rolling stock. So under their permissions, once they apply for their accreditation, all those other things will go. They can make a choice as to whether they want to be accredited for all that stuff as well. And the same with rail infrastructure manager. So an accredited rail infrastructure manager, or RIM we call them, has permissions under the RSL to conduct, design, commission, construct, maintain, modify, operate and decommission railway stations, track, signalling systems, etc. Now, some operators might just get accreditation for design of infrastructure, and that's all they do. They can't commission, construct or maintain. Some operators might go for the whole gamut and decide that they want to go from where to go, design, commission, construct, maintain and modify track infrastructure or signalling systems, etc. Okay, so they're the permissions that they can apply for. Okay, so the accreditation assessment process. Okay, so this is quite interesting how this works. So if you wanted to apply for an accreditation or a registration under the Rail Safety National Law, the first step would be to go to the ONSA website, and they will have an accreditation pack there with all the application requirements. So you go straight to their website. Once an operator decides they want to go down that path, they basically, as part of the application pack, they make a phone call to ONSA and they submit an expression of interest and make a phone call, or ONSA will get back to them and sort of have a conversation about exactly what they're looking for, so that ONSA knows what to assess when the operators apply. Okay, so that chat usually happens within 3 days. Once it's clear what the operator wants to do, the operator then gets, ONSA submits a proper application form, and it's got about 30 pages on it, and it's very technical and very difficult to understand. But hopefully during the conversation with ONSA on their previous first phone call, you'll have an idea of what to do. So once you've put in the form, once you complete the form, you'll submit the form. It'll go back to ONSA, and the first step ONSA does is they review the form and your requirements, and they conduct a risk assessment based on what your needs are and whether obviously you've got the competency or capacity to be able to actually do those operations. So once I guess that process is done, then ONSA will set up a process where the assessment will happen with the accreditation, if that makes sense. Also, there are fees for applying for accreditation. A one-off fee of $10,000 applies for an accreditation to be assessed. So it's not cheap. In the case of a private registration, it's $1,000. And also, just with ONSA in terms of fees, there are ongoing fees each year that operators pay. And that's based on how many, say, a rolling stock operator, how many track kilometres they do. There's a formula that they work out. Or in the case of a rail infrastructure manager, how many kilometres of track do they actually own and operate? Okay, so during the assessment process, so once we've got the application in, it'll be handed over to an ONSA office. Now, ONSA's got offices in each capital city, so Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, etc. And depending on what area the operations is going to be, say, for instance, it's a Victorian operation, the Melbourne ONSA office will get the accreditation application, and they'll assign it to a senior rail safety officer who will contact the operator and go through the steps of what accreditation looks like. Okay, so I guess the requirements for an operator to be accredited is that they must implement a safety management system, and the requirements in the safety management system are listed in what's called Schedule 1 of the Rail Safety National Law Regulations. I'm not going to go into it too much, but that's a part of the Rail Safety National Law where it documents what needs to be in a safety management system. So it's made up of 29 mandatory safety elements. So the safety management system must have those 29 mandatory elements. So the elements are pretty similar to, I guess, health and safety certification, but there's more to it added on top of that, if that makes sense. So once they've had a conversation with the rail safety officer, and they understand what the elements are, they must start documenting or putting together a safety management system that has all those requirements in it. So some of the key things that ONSA looks for would be that you must have a drug and alcohol program in place, a fatigue risk management program in place, mandatory health assessment for workers, or rail safety worker competency procedures as well. They're just 4 of the 29, okay? But the most important element that you need to document is around risk management. So it's a mandatory requirement and goes over and beyond, I guess, the standard ISO 3001 requirements. So because it's a high-risk environment, the rail industry, then ONSA's really prescribed the risk management requirements for a rail operator to comply with. Okay, so, we'll go back one. All right, so once the accreditation process has been completed, ONSA will provide the operator with a formal, what's called a notice of accreditation. Okay, so that's your certificate to say that you basically have got rail safety accreditation. Just back to the accreditation or the assessment process. So ONSA gives operators 6 months to complete from where to go the accreditation. So in other words, they'll allocate a rail safety officer to do 6 months worth of work. It won't be full-time, obviously. It'll just be part-time with all their other projects that they do. to provide the information, and ONSA will assess it and get back to them. And if it's not up to speed, ONSA will ask for further documentation, etc. But that whole process takes 6 months. If an operator believes that they need to get accredited earlier, ONSA does make provisions for that. But that's sort of the local arrangement. There's been some accreditations that I've done previously which have taken 2 months when they should have taken 6 months. So it depends on the needs and the urgency of the operator. Okay. So once the notice of accreditation has been issued, the details on that notice of accreditation will basically have the permissions for the type of accredited operations that the operators are allowed to carry out, i.e. whether they're a rail infrastructure manager or a rolling stock operator. The slide I just sort of went through before. The types of activities that can be conducted under these permissions. So can they construct, commission, operate, etc. The locations where the activities can be carried out. That's really important because under the ONSA accreditation regime, you can be accredited in Victoria, but you won't be able to operate in Queensland unless you stipulate that in your application. Okay, so you've got to be very careful about how you sort of do that. And the reason being is that there's different safe working systems, and the setup of the railways is different in each state, as people probably know, different track gauges, etc. Also, on the notice of accreditation, ONSA may, during the assessment, decide that there might be an area that they're not satisfied with the operator, and they may issue a restriction or a condition on their impending operations. Okay. And also, I guess, once the notice of accreditation has been issued, that there's a summary of changes or variations that are put down the bottom. So it's a legal document. It's a very important document for operators to have. And of course, if you don't get to that point, you've got a notice of accreditation, you simply can't operate. Okay. All right. So I guess in summary, we'll just go back here. All right. Sorry, in summary. So one thing I'll talk about, what constitutes a variation or accreditation? So a variation is an activity where, it's an application that an operator will put into ONSA if they're not accredited for an operation previously. So say, for instance, a rolling stock operator decides they want to be accredited to construct and commission rolling stock, but they haven't, in their initial application, put in to operate rolling stock. Then they need to, if they want to operate rolling stock, they've got to go to ONSA and say, I need to vary this accreditation to include that element of operations in there. And once again, ONSA will turn the clock back on and give them 6 months to provide evidence that they can safely do that. So an assessment process will happen again. And with a variation to accreditation, each time an operator puts one of them in, there's a fee of $1,000. Okay. So that's it. So they want to get it right from the start, basically. All right. So I guess in conclusion, so rail safety accreditation is a mandatory requirement for any person that seeks to operate as a rolling stock operator or a rail infrastructure manager. The Rail Safety National Law contains very prescriptive legislative requirements for the accreditation and registration processes. In having said that, they don't dictate the standards or codes you need to work to. You as an operator must put them or nominate them in your safety management system yourself. So the ONSA accreditation assessment process is very thorough. So the rail safety officers have checklists where they have to go through every single procedure that's provided to them and risk register to make sure that they will apply to the particular railway operations that they've applied for, the operators. And it can be very cumbersome for the operators as well. So at times what will happen is that if an operator submits a risk management plan and it simply doesn't comply with the Rail Safety National Law, then what will happen is that the rail safety officer will provide feedback to say, this is where you don't comply. You need to, review your system or your risk register or your risk management procedure and get it back to us so we can reassess it. So it can be very cumbersome. I've been involved in certain accreditation activities that have taken 18 months and they should have taken 6 months. And the reason being is that the quality of the information that was sent through to ONSA just wasn't up to speed. Okay, so once you get your notice of accreditation, obviously any railways activities that are carried outside the permissions of an RTO's notice of accreditation are a breach of the RSNL and can incur serious fines for the company and individuals as well. The last thing I want to talk about here is that with rail safety accreditation, there's no time limit on it. So once you get it, you keep it until it's either suspended, revoked, or surrendered by the operator. Okay, so that the rail safety accreditation is basically, or registration, is ongoing until something happens, whether it's surrendered or on to take actions to take it off you, circumstances like that. And that's a bit different to other sort of, certifications. So the difference between a certification, say an ISO certification, and rail safety accreditation is that rail safety accreditation is a choice by the operator that, and it's locked in for not a period of time, but just locked in forever, but subject to ongoing scrutiny by ONSA. Whereas a certification is a choice where a company can have a certification and basically, just let it lapse if they want, and then they haven't got it anymore. Okay. So that's all from me. Thank you, audience. So is there any questions from anyone?
Excellent. So yeah, I'm just throwing it out to everyone who's joined. Does anyone have any questions? You may just pop them in the chat, or feel free to also directly message me via the chat as well, and I can also raise them with Michael now. But while we are waiting, Michael, you mentioned that there's hefty fines that ONSA can issue. So I'm just wondering, can you give an example of how much the fine would be?
Okay, so it does vary, but look, at the end of the day, if a person operates a railway without formal accreditation, there can be fines of up to $500,000. It's very excessive. That's for say an organisation. Individuals, say $100,000. To my knowledge, I've been with ONSA pretty much from its inception. That's never happened. There have been fines issued around, breaches of the law in other areas, but certainly not for the accreditation side of things. But very, very steep fines.
I see. There is a question that's come through privately. So you mentioned before that there's checklists that ONSA uses. So if someone's applying for accreditation, is there a checklist of documents that they would need? And also, where can they find that checklist?
Okay, yeah. So that's a good question, actually. So what happens is that if you go back to the where I talked about operators don't need to have full accreditation. They can, say, a rail infrastructure manager that wants to put in signalling systems might just have design, commission and construct, and that's it. So what will happen is that when ONSA gets the application, they will assess it, and they will send back information to the application or the person that applies, detailing exactly what the requirements are. So it's like a checklist, but basically it will give you the full information of what you need to do to satisfy your safety management system and get it ready for assessment. So yes, there is processes in place for that.
Excellent. Does anyone have any more questions? Oh, here we go. Here's one from Michael Martinez. So if someone wants to know more and understand better rail safety regulations, so where should they go?
Well, that's a good question. I guess, look, a lot of people can, get a work health and safety diploma, cert or degree, whatever. They're a dime a dozen. But in terms of rail safety, it's very, very limited to what you can do. And most people, I guess, get their knowledge through working in the industry as a rail safety professional. So I guess the answer to the question is it's probably through mentoring, finding someone that can, mentor the person, because there really isn't any sort of tertiary courses out there that can cater for it. There are some, the Australasian Railway Association does hold a course, Introduction to Rail, but that's about it. It's an intro. But when it comes to the rail safety side of things, it's just one of those sciences where really no one's picked it up and run with it as a proper, training, sort of course.
Okay. Thank you for that. Also, Glenn has just said thank you, Michael. Good presentation.
Yeah, I've got a question.
Yep.
Hi, Michael. Thank you for that presentation. It was really insightful.
Thanks, Glenn.
Yeah, so I was just wondering if a operator has a non-conformance within an audit, what's the time frame they have to fix that?
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, so this is a bit away from accreditation, but this is also ONSA do have a compliance program in place where they do actually go to operators and do their checks and balances after they've been accredited. Good question, Sam. So if a non-conformance is picked up by, say, a Ross Safety Officer during an audit or an inspection, what happens, ONSA will take the detail back, and there's, I guess, they classify non-conformances into category 1, 2, 3. One being very safety critical, needs to be fixed ASAP. 2, medium. 3, well, it's a lower risk to safety, so they can add more time. So generally what happens is that if it's a category 3 type of event, a non-conformance, or NCR as we call them, then you'll find that they will probably give the operator perhaps a week to do it in. If it's a category 2, they can give up to a month. If it's a category 3, it's a low level issue that requires corrective action, or it's a corrective action that's going to be rolled out over a period of time, because it's one of those sort of things you just can't do straight away. They can give up to 6 months, no problems at all. But it's quite discretionary amongst the rail safety officers as to how they apply timelines.
Awesome. Thanks for your question, Sam. Does anyone else have any other questions for Michael? Okay. Awesome. So I'd say that would be it. I'd say we'd wrap this one up. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Tracy says thanks Michael for inviting her. Great presentation. So
okay, that's great.
Thank you. It was a brilliant presentation, very insightful. Thank you, Michael. So for anyone who did join us a little bit later, Michael covered off quite a lot in this session. This is essentially our second legacy session, and we're fortunate enough to have Michael Martinez from Alstom to present at this one. So thank you for your time today, Michael. Is there any way, if anyone has any further questions, that they can reach you directly?
So what I'll do, I'll just put my maybe just an email address. I think I'll just throw in there, and if anyone wants to send me an email, that'll be fine. Yeah.
Yep. Excellent. Not a problem. And for anyone who's inquiring about the legacy program, it's a program that's recently been launched by Alium Works, and our legacy mentors essentially do give their time to help and pass on the experiences and their knowledge that they've gained over their years, and essentially passing on their legacy to the next generation. So if anyone is interested in joining and presenting themselves, feel free to send us via contact us page on our website, or you can send an email to contact at aliumworks.com.au. But I would say this session would be complete. Thank you again, Michael.
Sorry, Michael. Sorry, Richard. Just one final question. Sorry, before you go, just to throw a spanner in there. Michael, you mentioned there's 29 elements for an operator, for the risk safety management when they apply. Now, going forward, obviously with technology and so forth, things changing within the industry. What do you think in terms of the elements? Will there anything will be changed just to being consistent, just moving forward, especially with the new driverless trains and so forth?
That's a good question, Sam. So, look, the Rail Safety National Law is what it is. There are updates to it every couple of years or so, but essentially it does actually cover off on that sort of thing. If ONSA don't have anything that's relevant to, say, cybersecurity, for instance, what they will do, they'll actually issue a industry notice, or I guess instead of putting it into legislation, it will be a policy which they will hold operators to. Because you've got to remember, so when you change legislation, put changes in, it's got to go through Parliament as well, and of course to a law or an act or whatever. So therefore, it's hard to expand on the Rail Safety National Law often, but the standard 29 elements are pretty much, they cater for everything out there at the moment, and including, like I said, Sydney Metro's got driverless trains. So once I did the accreditation on that, and with the current rail safety national law, they were able to, cover off on all the elements of that operation. But it's pretty much policy will be created around new things that come into the industry, especially when we're going to implement European train control systems. We're going to digitalise the system in certain areas, and of course, I said cybersecurity. That's going to be a massive requirement in the next 12 months.
Yeah, interesting. No, great. Thank you, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Does anyone else have any extra questions they want to ask before we go?
So I'll put my Richard. I'll put my email address up there if anyone wants to contact.
Excellent.
Have a further discussion. It's all good.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, I'd say that would be it for the session. Thank you, everyone, so much for participating and giving your time today. Have an awesome one.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.